Even with the fear of a recession in 2020, 65% of people say they believe there will be one. 61% of Americans say the election will not be about the economy, according to a CNBC and Acorn survey. With the U.S. economy experiencing its longest expansion ever, 10 years since the last recession, is the current state of financial security misleading Americans into what they should be really focused on this November at the ballot box? Joining us on 710 KURV is James D. Virgilio. I hope I said that right. I'm sorry if I butchered it. He's a leading fiduciary investor and financial planner. Now, something else that we've heard recently during the months is just the amount of taxes that some running for president want to raise on the middle class. Some want to raise taxes on the rich, on both. But I think indirectly, it's going to affect all of us here in this country. So I guess my first question to you is, James, someone like as yourself that you see this every day for a living, what are you focused on when it comes to, our economy?
It's such a complicated question, and because there's political influences, it's hard to sometimes get to the substance of the matter. But you spoke right off the bat about taxes. And I think what happens when we think of taxes is we think progressive taxation is good discrimination, so to speak, right? Let's tax the rich people more and let's tax those who make less. That seems to be good. So we're sort of pro-discrimination when it comes to wealth, and we're not about discrimination in other things. But the real question to ask is, what happens when we actually raise taxes or lower taxes? What happens to wealth across the country? And whether or not our feelings like this or not, there's been plenty of studies and, in fact, observational periods in this time that if someone like Bernie Sanders were to win and raise taxes very, very high on the wealthy, you actually wind up getting less tax revenue as a country over time. You get fewer dollars because people that have money have a choice. You have a choice where to invest your money. You have a choice how to be taxed. There are lots of options that you have when it comes to taxation. So taxation is not just a linear or one-to-one curve where if we raise taxes on the wealthy, that means the government has extra money to then use for support services. So this is true whether it comes to student loans or really anything else within our finances. It's just not as simple as we'd like to make it out to be when it comes to taxing one group in favor of another.
Yeah, that never made any sense to me, James, because even your Bernie Sanders that want to tax the billionaires in what they call the 1%. But it's crazy because if you're making more than I think it's $400,000 a year in this country, you are considered part of the 1%. Nobody really realizes or thinks about that. But if you tax the wealthy, if you tax the billionaires of this country, to me, it's like they are providing thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs amongst themselves to us, to their employees. And to me, it's like if you tax them, does that have like a little domino effect and will it end up impacting us?
It certainly will. And you're hitting the nail right on the head. And this is where feelings meet fact, meets data. And even something like raising the minimum wage economically seems like such a no-brainer.
That makes
but when
no
you
sense.
raise the minimum wage, right, well, we know when that happens, what actually happens is people that need those minimum wage jobs get fewer of them. There are fewer available because now businesses cannot afford to hire as many people. And that tends to affect those who need jobs the most. And when it comes to taxation, one thing that always really confuses me as being someone who can dive into the data is that rich people in America are not getting rich by exploiting others. It's not that Jeff Bezos or others have gotten rich because they've taken money from other people, but they've gotten rich for the reasons you've mentioned. They've created services and things that we all use every single day. They are not taking money from someone else in order to make themselves wealthy. It's one of the best things about living in America. And in fact, here's a fun fact for you. Only 3% of the American population, Roxanne, remained in the bottom 20% of income for as long as 8 years.
Wow.
What that means is almost everyone in this country moves up in income as we go on through our lifetime. So this sort of mythical top 1% versus the bottom percent is not a static thing. It's always changing. 4 to 5 millionaires started with no money at all. So it's really unfortunate that we have what I'm going to call discrimination against making money in this country right now. The narrative is just not correct.
There's something that it hit me a couple months back. And at the end of the day, I think the root of all of this is honestly jealousy, James. There are people that are just jealous of the Jeff Bezos and your Mark Zuckerbergs of the world because they didn't have the ideas that those men did. And they are providing thousands of jobs. And like you mentioned, you have millionaires every single year, people that start from nothing and then they work their way up. And they now have the blessings of being, I guess, economically free because of this country. And to me, it worries me, even as a Hispanic, pandemic, my parents came from nothing in Mexico and worked their way here. And now we're blessed beyond belief because of the freedoms that this country has to offer. And because we have that, the capitalism, and because we have that chance to go up in the world or in this country. And people are trying to kind of, in my opinion, kind of tamp that down and just stay in your lane, and if we, for example, do have a Bernie Sanders president, Lord willing we don't, but if we do, how would that impact us in this country economically?
Well, it would impact us significantly, regardless of how we feel. And socialism is something that sounds very good. I understand the appeal to it. It says, what if we could have a world where everybody was exactly equal?
But it will never work.
We all contributed to society. But again, this is where you have to look at the data. It doesn't work. And the more you have a government take over services, the worse your country gets when it comes to the things you just mentioned: standard of living, creation of wealth, freedom. And those are facts. Those are not opinions. That's not a politically charged statement. That's an observable fact throughout time and history. And if Bernie Sanders were to get elected, you're talking about free education in college, which means a subsidy where you're going to have taxpayers paying for that. You're talking about wealth taxes on people's existing wealth, which is something that's never been done in this country. You're talking about raising income taxes across the board for the upper class, if
and
you will.
And the middle class. He also mentioned he wants to raise the middle class. Bernie also said that. Yeah.
Big secret, right, is this is what will happen. So when federal taxation was brought to the United States in 1913, originally the idea was just to tax 1% of the richest people in the world. And there were only several hundred people they were going to tax in the U.S. And then what happens? Taxes trickle down within just 15 or 20 years later to where everyone's getting taxed, and everyone's getting taxed a lot. And this is what would happen with Bernie Sanders as well. To pay for a socialized government, everyone has to pay a lot of money. And all you have to do, Roxanne, to look for an example of this is look at the value added tax in Europe. Everybody is paying that 15 or 22% tax, regardless of their wealth. Why does that exist? Because the wealthy people will leave the countries that they are in, or they will invest their dollars in other places if you continue to tax them at such high rates.
Joining us on 710 KURV is James D. Virgilio. He's a leading fiduciary investor and financial planner and a professor at the Wharton College of Business at the University of Florida. Something that I have here on my notes, James, is student loans. I know that there are presidential candidates that are announcing they want to forgive student loans. I guess when it comes to student loans, what are the benefits of debt-free pass versus paying it on your own?
This is such a complicated question because on one hand, if all of student loans were to be forgiven, then if you had a student loan, that would be great for you. Those people would get very real benefits. But then who pays for all the student loans to get forgiven? Well, you do, essentially, right? If you're getting a job, if you're a doctor and you have $300,000 or $400,000 of loans right now, your loans get forgiven, and then guess what happens? Taxes have to go up. That's the only way the government can pay for anything is to tax its people. So you're going to have a further discriminatory practice. But more importantly, we can look across other countries to see what free education gives us. And in reality, the results are not very good. In fact, England had free education for a very, very long time, and in the 1990s went away from it. And the reason they went away from it is the people they wanted to educate, the lower classes of their population, were getting less educated. Well, why is this? If we offer free education, if we waive everyone's student loans,
quality goes down.
Free college, correct. Well, not only quality goes down, but demand goes way up, right? You have a fixed supply of universities that exist. The government's running all of them, and now you have this increased demand. Well, how do you filter out students? How does the University of Florida, where I live here in Gainesville, how do they keep students out? Well, they continue to raise metrics, and eventually you wind up looking like England or Germany, where in middle school, you're basically telling kids you're not on the college track because you failed these tests. The exams become very rigorous. Things become very difficult. You lose the freedom of choice. And so while that seems like, oh, no big deal, let's just offer all these things for free, you always have to look at the unintended consequences of your actions. And by subsidizing, as we talked about a lot today, if you pay for me to do something, and this continues on throughout time, you actually wind up getting a weaker society when it comes to wealth. And then secondly, it creates a huge moral hazard. If we're going to tell all of these people that their student loan debt can be forgiven by the government, the next time something happens when they're borrowing money from the government, they tend to increase their recklessness. And so as a society, I think it comes down to what you really believe, Roxanne. Do you believe in individual responsibility and teaching people to behave for themselves and improve their lives? Or do you believe in the government taking care of you? But the problem with believing the government taking care of you is in history, it's never, ever worked. The government does not take care of you. In fact, your standard of living will go down, and it ultimately affects those that the government's trying to help the most, even when they're trying to do the right thing. And that's sort of the big data point that just gets missed because our feelings tell us, wouldn't it be great if we could just wave a wand fix all these social problems.
This is when I love Ben Shapiro's quote, "Facts don't care about your feelings." But back to the student loan. I went to school in Lakeland, Florida, down in the middle by Orlando and Tampa. And I went to a private school, Southeastern University, and it was expensive. But I knew what I was getting into. And like you mentioned, the individual, like that is your responsibility. I'm not going to force that on somebody to help me pay my student loans when I knew what I was doing when I wanted to go to that school. I wish we had more time with you, James. And I'm just thinking, if you have students in your classroom that are for socialism, just do a little experiment. Just share the grades amongst everybody. And then at the end of the semester, be like, now are you for it? Or do you want to do things on your own? Before we go, do you have more information about the tips you shared with us today?
Sure, you certainly can. You can go to my website at cddwealth.com. It's Charlie David, davidwealth.com. And if you even come remotely close to Googling my last name, James D. Virgilio, I'm the first one that pops up. So thankful there's not too many Italians with that last name.
Thank you so much for joining us. That is James D. Virgilio. He is a leading fiduciary investor, a financial planner, and a professor at Wharton College of Business at the University of Florida. Our guest on 710 KURV.